Hey, Getty. It's time to wake up, buddy. We're talking about your 5 favorite Rush albums.
Good afternoon, my fellow monks, and welcome back to another video with the Monkey Sensing Sensei. And today, I got a special video planned for you guys, something I've been cooking up for a long time. I had to wait to get the records in stock and in my collection. I had to do some brainstorming. And speaking of brains, what we're about to talk about is going to be featured in this video. So let's get started. And if you couldn't already tell by the title of this video, I will indeed be talking about my top 5 favorite Rush albums. And the funny thing about this list was that number 1 was not tough at all. But number 5 was the hard one for me. And coming in at number 5 is the very last album the band would ever record. Released in 2012, I'm indeed talking about Clockwork Angels. And now when I said number 5 was the toughest choice, I meant it, because it was between Clockwork Angels or Vapor Trails. And you could see how I had a hard time here, because these two are both great albums and they both have different themes and concepts to them. But I had to go with Clockwork Angels because I just love the concept, I love the theme, and the fact that it ends with the garden is just a 10 out of 10 for me right there. And also the fact that it was their very last album that they would ever release as a band, and the tour that followed it was just amazing. I love listening to it on Spotify. It just sounds so good, and I love the set list for it. I mean, just looking at the track list, you have tracks like Caravan, Brought Up to Be, the title track. I love the riff on The Anarchist. I love the acoustic strumming on Halo Effect. 7 Cities of Gold, the records. Headlong Flight is a great way to end the third side of the vinyl. I love Wish Them Well, and of course, The Garden. What an emotional closer to finish out the record and their career. Oh, so good. I love this record. Coming in at number 4 is an album that not many people talk about in the Rush circles. It is not very loved by the fan base. At least it wasn't. Now it's starting to get a little bit of a resurgence in the Rush fans community. When this album first came out, it was a huge turnoff because of how keyboard heavy it was. And of course, I'm talking about 1984's Grace Under Pressure. This album features such heavy hitters, such as Distant Early Warning with that haunting keyboard intro, with Getty's bass eventually coming into the fold. It sounds fantastic. And then you have songs like After Image, Red Sector A, that are really more emotional and topics that Rush hadn't really talked about to this point. Red Lenses, a song talking about the Cold War, which was really at its peak in the mid-80s. And something that they touched upon on Distant Early Warning as well. And it closes with the amazing Between the Wheels, which is one of their more rockin' closers to an album, especially in their 80s period. I love the really haunting keyboard melody, the bass, and Alex has put down this really haunting and heavy riff. It's almost reminiscent to me of something from Moving Pictures like Witch Hunt, and how that also has a haunting riff. But we're going to get to that later. So moving on to my 3rd favorite Rush album, we have the immense, the epic, the powerful final album in Rush's more progressive era, Hemispheres. This album is just crazy good from start to finish. If you would have asked me 2 years ago, I might have actually put Farewell to Kings in Hemispheres' spot. But growing to listen to this album over and over again on my turntable and listening to more live renditions on it, our Moving Pictures 40 and the Hemispheres tour and just bits and pieces of other tours, I've grown to really love this album and just how epic and heavy it sounds. And I love the concept of the left brain and the right brain at war, and then this one god, Cygnus, coming in to bring it all together and bring balance to the brain and make it a perfect sphere. Just the whole side 1 is just one epic piece. It's 18 minutes and 7 seconds long, and not a second, not a note is wasted on that whole piece. And I love how on the vinyl edition you can actually get it broken down. It's probably hard to see that, but you get it broken down per the piece, and you have how long it is per piece. And it's like a little miniature story within one giant story. And I think that's great how Rush were able to end their highly progressive era on an album like this, where it's so complex and complicated. And in fact, this album actually almost broke up the band because of just how complicated it was. The final track on here, La Via Strangiato, one of the best instrumentals of all time, was so complex they wanted to do it in one take, but they had to record it in 3 chunks just because of how many different movements and just how long the piece was. And one thing I always loved about Hemispheres was for the people who complained that A Farewell to Kings was too Ren Fairy, too acoustic-y, it wasn't enough kind of heavy metal or heavy prog rock like on 2112 or Crest of Steel. Well, they got their wish with Hemispheres because this album is full of just heavy riffs. And Circumstances to me is the antithesis of that. And then going into The Trees, another short piece on this album talking about the trees. But the amazing Donna Halper over at Rush Fans, they just did a deep dive on Hemispheres about a couple weeks ago. And her interpretation of The Trees, which I thought was brilliant on her part, was she was actually comparing it to the battle of the sexes almost. How you have the oaks and the maples and they're battling. And the oaks are like these strong trees like the males. And the females are like the maple trees, that are a little more whimsical, a little bit more, they want more, they want to have some light too, where she equates that to women's rights. And I thought that was just mind-blowing to me how she came up with that. But I love hearing a female's perspective on certain things, especially Neil's lyrics, which you could take his lyrics in any kind of form. And that's the thing that's the thing I love about Neil, was that he was able to write lyrics that didn't look down on you, that he thought if you are listening to Rush, if you listen to music, you are an intelligent person. And that's something I give Neil huge props for. If you're someone who's a fan of progressive music, but you want something that's a little more on the heavy side, it's not like a Genesis or even a certain era of Pink Floyd, and you want something that's a little more rockin', I would totally recommend an album like this for your record collection. Moving on to number 2, you guys might be surprised that I picked this particular record for number 2 and not number 1. But I love my number 1 pick just a little bit more than my number 2 pick. And that album, of course, is the Epic album that made Rush superstars and they drove them right to the mainstream. That is, of course, the Epic Moving Pictures. I mean, I don't even have to say more. This album is a classic. It's a masterpiece from front to back. You have Tom Sawyer, which I love that song. I'm not sick of hearing it. I love Red Barchetta, the concept of it. And one thing about Rush at this time was that they were able to write more complex pieces with a story attached to them, but they were able to condense it to a good 5 or 6 minute long track and not have to put it in a side-long epic. And to me, this is the height of Rush's powers as prog rock heroes. Of course, you gotta talk about the amazing Limelight. Limelight's probably my favorite Rush song of all time. It's a masterpiece. It's emotional. I love Alex's solo in the middle. Neil and his lyrics really are a guide to help you get through life. And this was written in 1981. And I feel like a lot of these lyrics, most of Neil's lyrics have aged very well. And that's something else too, that his lyrics are timeless. This album features YYZ, of course, their second instrumental that they would do. And I think this is probably my favorite instrumental, but La Via Strangiato, of course, is extremely close. And side 2 has their last epic, The Camera Eye, that's just a few seconds shy of 11 minutes. I love how the song goes from 2 different perspectives. So you go from New York, which is the first half, and then it splits to this instrumental bit and goes to the second half, which basically points the camera at England. And I think that's also brilliant how they're able to tell the story, but it's going into 2 parts. That's one thing about The Camera Eye that I do love about it, but at the same time, I don't know if I count The Camera Eye as really their last epic, because yeah, it's 10 minutes long, but there's only 2 parts to it really. It's just the Manhattan and then the English part. While other epics on other albums have multiple parts. So that's kind of a point of contention for me. Is Camera Eye really their last epic? Let me know in the comments below if you think that's technically their last epic, because I want to know. And the version of this album that I'm holding is actually the Walmart exclusive Opaque red pressing that just came out in line with the 40th anniversary of Moving Pictures. And this pressing sounds absolutely phenomenal. So if I was to pick a pressing to buy on vinyl, it'd be this one. Normally I wouldn't say that for Walmart pressing, but because this is half-speed mastered along with direct metal mastered, it really adds some sound clarity, and it adds some much needed expansion of the sound that this album needed. And then I have the 2015 reissue as well, and that also sounds phenomenal. But I would have to put this over it just because of its sound quality. And if you want to see me do an unboxing of this, I actually have a video that I did talking about the album and me opening it up. And I'll leave a link for that in the description box below. And one thing I forgot to mention too is I also did an unboxing of Clockwork Angels. So if you want to check that out, I'll also have a link to that in the description box below. Alright, now before we get to number one, I did want to talk about a few honorable mentions. So, when we talk about Rush, they have so many great albums. So I'm talking about Fly By Night, Vapor Trails, Signals. All those albums are great. So if I had to pick a number 6, it would definitely be Vapor Trails from 2002. I love songs like One Little Victory, I love Nocturne, and it's such an emotional album given that Neil was going through so much tragedy in the late 90s. I could have also put 2112 in the ranking as well. I love 2112. The concept epic. I love Passage to Bangkok, Lessons, Tears, Something for Nothing on side 2. Also a phenomenal record, but it just missed my top 5 by 2 spots. And my last honorable mention, before I get to my number 1 pick, I'd have to pick Signals from 1982. This album is fantastic. This actually opens up the synthwave era that they'd be going into the 80s. While Moving Pictures and even Permanent Waves, to a certain extent, helped to kickstart that, it was really Signals that kicked that era off in a big way. You have songs like Countdown, Subdivision, the song that I can relate to, Analog Kid, Chemistry. I love Losing It, which they actually played on their final tour with Ben Mink, who actually played the violin on the song, on the original song on the album. And I think it's really cool how they brought him out on the R40 tour. And it makes me wish I could have seen them live, because I would love to have seen that song played live on the R40 tour. I wish I could have at least seen that tour or the Clockwork Angels, because that would have been 2 phenomenal tours to see them live on. Alright, finally, we are on to my favorite Rush album, number 1. And that would be their start going into the 80s. And most people already know what my number 1 is, but I'm going to show it anyway. And that'll be Permanent Waves from 1980. This album was actually recorded in 1979, but released on my birthday, no less, of 1980, January 14th. And what I love about this record, as much as I love Moving Pictures and everything going forward, something about this album is the perfect blend of the more raw sound of the 70s material mixed with the more mainstream approach of something like Moving Pictures. And a lot of people argue, saying that Moving Pictures is the perfect blend, but this album has just a little bit more of that raw energy from something like a Hemispheres or Farewell to Kings or even 2112. I mean, just listen to the opening riff of Spirit of Radio and that guitar solo, and then Geddy's shrieking vocals towards the breakdown of Free Will. It's just crazy. And again, that solo in Free Will is just fantastic. And Geddy's bass line going throughout the song. You got Jacob's Ladder, which is one of their more down-tempo epics. The song itself details a storm. So you can hear the drums and the guitar that really showcase a thunderstorm in the background. But it's in music form. And it gets heavier and it builds and builds and builds. And then towards the end of the song, you have these more sparkly, these more spooky synths that showcase the clouds opening up. And you can almost hear the beam of light cast down in the sky. And then at the very end, Geddy sings "Follow Men's Eyes" as they look to the sky. So you can really picture people looking up at the sky and they see the Jacob's Ladder coming down. And it's just brilliant stuff how they're able to make an audio version of a thunderstorm. Oh, it's brilliant. And then side 2 features emotional cuts that really tug at the heartstrings, like Entre Nous and Different Strings. Talking about strings here, Different Strings is an excellent song. It's one of the shortest songs they'd ever write, and it's one of the more softer, ballady type songs they'd ever write. But it's one of my favorite songs in their entire catalog. I mean, Different Hearts will beat on different strings. Great lyric writing. And actually, Geddy wrote different strings, and this would be the last song that he would have a songwriting credit on. And it's such a Geddy song too. It just sounds like something that Geddy would have wrote. We cannot talk about Permanent Waves without talking about the amazing closing track, Natural Science. Now to me, Natural Science is their real last epic. And let me explain why. While the camera eye is longer, going back to that point I talked about and moving pictures, that only has the two parts and they sound exactly the same, just with different lyrics. So if you really wanted to, you could take it apart and have it be a 5-minute long track, and there you go. It wouldn't really be an epic. But Natural Science, it thrives because it has 3 different parts, and they're all sonically different from each other. And I love how it opens with the soft waves and the tide going in and out, and the acoustics. And then you have Geddy coming in with these vocals that are just drenched in reverb. That middle section, after the universe is created, you have this really rockin' heavy section that sounds like it could have came out of 2112 or Hemispheres, with just how heavy it is. And of course, the version that I'm holding up here is the 2015 reissue. That's 180 gram. I missed out on the 200 gram version, but this is the 180 gram version. These all sound great. My Hemispheres is the 2015. And so is my Grace Under Pressure. But that one is 200 gram. That one's special. Before I end this video, I want you guys to let me know, what are your top 5 favorite Rush albums? Let me know in the comments below. I want to see from top 5 to number 1. I love hearing from you guys. I love seeing the comments, especially from people who are on the Rush fans community. I have been on their show a couple times, and it's a great feeling to be part of this tight-knit, woven community of people who respect and love this band as much as I do. And if you guys like what you see, make sure to give this video a like, a comment. Make sure to subscribe to the channel if you like what I'm putting out. I really appreciate it. I'm up to 119 subscribers now, which isn't much, but I appreciate every single one of you who click subscribe, who click like, who comment. It really helps me keep the channel going. So that'll do it for me, guys. I hope everyone has a great afternoon, and most importantly, make sure to keep meditating through vinyl.